YouTube, I greet you with the best of greetings. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. May the peace, blessings of Allah be with you all. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most kind. On behalf of Aisha Masjid and UKM Youth Walsall, I would like to welcome you all to another one of our events titled A Doctor's Mission to Gaza, featuring one of our own guest speakers, Dr. Israr Ul Haq. The program for today will include recitation of a few verses from the Holy Quran, short hadith, and then the main presentation, followed by an opportunity for the audience to ask our guest speaker some questions they may have. And finally, we will end the program with some light refreshments. Inshallah, we aim to conclude the program by 9 o'clock. To begin the program, I call upon Brother Ahmed Al-Khawli to recite and translate verses 1 and 2 from Surah Al-Isra from the Holy Quran.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم سبحان الذي أسرى بعبده ليلا من المسجد الحرام إلى المسجد الأقصى الذي باركنا حوله لنريه من آياتنا إنه هو السميع البصير وآتينا موسى الكتاب وجعلناه هدى لبني إسرائيل ألا تتخذوا من دوني وكيلا. And the translation: Exalted is he who took his servant by night from Masjid al-Haram to Masjid al-Aqsa, whose surroundings we have blessed, to show him of our signs. Indeed, he is the hearing, the seeing. And we gave Musa alayhi salam the scripture and made it a guidance for Bani Israel, that you not take others than me as disposer of affairs.
Jazakallah khair. This was Brother Ahmed Al-Khawli who recited verses 1 and 2 from Surah Al-Isra. I now call upon Brother Ubada Jadoon to come and read a short hadith.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It is narrated by Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu in Sahih al-Bukhari that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, لا تشد الرحال إلا إلى ثلاثة المساجد المسجد الحرام ومسجد الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم ومسجد الأقصى. And the translation: the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, do not set out on a journey except for 3 mosques, that is Al-Masjid al-Haram, the Mosque of Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the Mosque of Al-Aqsa.
This was Brother Ubada Jadoon. We will now proceed to the main segment of the program, which promises to be a profound and impactful evening. We are honored to welcome Dr. Israr Ul Haq, a dedicated GP who has served on the front line in Gaza during the height of Israel's genocidal war against the Palestinians. Israr has been privileged to participate in 3 separate missions to Gaza, collaborating with various international medical relief organizations. His first mission was in February 2024 where he worked in the A&E department of the European Hospital in southern Gaza. His second mission was, alhamdulillah, in the month of Ramadan, where he worked in the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital in Deir al-Bala in central Gaza, and his most recent visit was in September 24, again working in the A&E department of the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital in Deir al-Bala in central Gaza. Throughout these missions, he provided life-saving care to those who have endured unimaginable loss. Tonight, Dr. Israr will share his personal experiences and insights, offering first-hand accounts from his time in Gaza just before the fragile ceasefire. He will discuss the vital role of medical professionals in war zones and the importance of their work for the people of Gaza during this devastating period. So without further delay, I welcome Israr Ul Haq to give his presentation.
Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, wa salatu wa salam wal mursaleen. Right. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, brothers and sisters. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Yeah. Jazakallah khair for attending today. I think you will benefit from this, inshallah. You hear okay? Can people hear it at the back okay? I'll just hold it like this. I'll just hold it like this. Okay, so Jazakallah khair for attending today. I think you'll find it beneficial in the sense that you will have some takeaway messages today that you can then implement in your own lives, in the lives of your children, and in the lives of those around you, where you can make a real world difference to what's going on. And you can also, you can actually feel like you have participated in helping them. So what I intend to do today, and I won't take up too much of your time, is I will give a brief overview of each of the missions that I went on, describing what I saw, what my feelings were, and I'm going to give a personal account of what I saw. And I just want to say at the start that these are my own personal views, not the views of anybody else. It's just based on what I observed. Okay. And then the other thing, I can see there are a lot of youngsters here, mashallah. The only thing that I will say is I do intend to show some images because I think they are important. Some of them are quite graphic. So if you don't want your children to see any of them, then that's up to you. And it's your choice and option. But I think in order to really get a flavor of what was going on there during this whole genocidal sort of one-sided attack, you have to see the pictures in order to really get a good feel of things. So as Dr. Israr mentioned, my first mission was in February 2024. I went under the umbrella of the UN and the WHO, and we went to Khan Yunis, which was, at that time, it was a city that was under siege. It was a city that was, it had many hospitals. They had a lot of flagship hospitals in the Gaza Strip, and they were under siege. The hospital that I went to was a European Gaza hospital. I didn't know what to expect. I've got more than 20 years of experience working in the NHS, working abroad, all in the healthcare sector, but none of it prepared me for what I was going to see. As soon as we entered through Rafah at that time. Rafah was still open, which was the Egyptian border. And as we entered through Rafah, from the Egyptian side to the Palestinian side, the Egyptian side had full electricity, it had full air conditioning, it had everything. As soon as we took maybe the distance that it is from here to the end of the masjid to cross over the border onto the other side, there was no electricity. There were craters in the floor from where missiles had landed, and there were cats which were starving, there were kids which were crying, and it was just complete chaos. As we got through the building and we stepped out, the first thing you hear is a buzz, and just like zzz. And I turned to one of the Palestinians there next to me, and I asked them, I said, what on earth is this sound? And he pointed to the sky and he said, take a look, these are the drones that have been surveilling us for the last however many months. And he kept doing this to me. So I asked for somebody to translate, and they said, he's telling you that they are doing facial recognition on all of you, everyone who is entering. So they have all your details, etc., everything as soon as you enter. So that's quite an unnerving experience, to have a drone fly down low enough to look and do facial recognition, etc., and that kind of thing. So when we actually arrived to the hospital itself, there was absolute chaos. This hospital could only handle, it was built to only handle maybe about 300 patients maximum, and that's considered a relatively large hospital in UK standards. There was more than 10,000 patients and displaced people in that area. Some people, maybe it was exaggerated, but they said up to 25,000. It certainly felt like it when I was walking around. And as soon as we put our stuff down and we went into our rooms, the accommodation that we had been given, you know, there's cockroaches everywhere, and it's hot. There's no AC, and then I'm not even going to mention what the bathrooms looked like. And so all you want to do, though, because this is something that you've been waiting to do for so long, all you wanted to do was just drop your stuff, get your equipment, and go straight to the department that you've been allocated for. So I went with a lot of surgeons. So a lot of them went straight to theatre to have a look, or onto the wards to have a look at what patients needed, doing amputations, etc. Myself and a colleague, we went to the A&E department. We were allocated to work in the majors, in the resus area in the A&E, because every day we were getting mass casualty events. Mass casualty events is something which is defined as an event that overwhelms the capacity of the hospital, i.e. there are more patients coming in than what the hospital can cope with. And in the UK, you get an average of maybe 1 or 2 mass casualty events a year, average. In there, every single day, there was 2, 3 mass casualty events. You'd hear the bomb go off. Within an hour or so, the people would start coming in. By this time, when I went, it was 4 months already into the war, and what happened was that people didn't have any fuel anymore because there was a blockade, etc. These kind of things, and so people were bringing their relatives on carts pulled by donkeys, very slowly, and they would bring body parts, all separate body parts, and I'll show you some pictures, etc., that kind of thing. I remember one particular patient who came, and he walked and burst into the resus room, which is the main room where we resuscitate all the major injuries, and all he brought was a pair of feet. There was no patient attached to these feet. And he was so traumatized, because I think it was his father, and he was saying, please, just can you do something about this? And we asked him, where's the patient? Oh, he said, oh, he's still under the rubble. Or can you do something about these feet? This is how mentally they had been traumatized, to the point where they could not even think clearly anymore. I remember the story of one man who came in, and I'll show you his picture. And when he came in fact, I'll keep that for when I show you the slideshow. I'll explain his story then, because you'll understand it more when you see the pictures. The other thing that I noticed was staffing levels were very low. There was hardly anybody in the departments, which is why they needed our help as relief doctors. Having said that, the people who had taken up the slack of all the doctors who had left were the medical students. And my respect for medical students there just went through the roof. They were even more skilled than me. They were more brave than me in doing procedures. And they had so much energy. And they would be there for 24 hours a day, and then take a break for maybe 5-6 hours, and come again for another 24-hour shift. And when we were driving around the areas that were designated a safe zone, we were driving around and we would see the buildings, the way that they had collapsed. I'd been to the Turkey-Syria earthquake. When the Turkey-Syria earthquake happened in 2023, I went there on a relief mission as well. Not a medical, it was just a humanitarian relief mission. And I thought I would never ever see any devastation like that ever again. But subhanAllah, this devastation, this man-made devastation, just paled in comparison to what I had seen in Turkey. You know, the laws of physics, they looked like they didn't apply in Gaza. In Gaza, you would see the buildings, they were bent into such weird shapes that you would think that there's no way that this building, it looked like a cartoon. That's the best way that I can explain it, that it looked like a cartoon. Like, you know, if you get a kid to draw buildings and how they're all over the place, that's exactly what it looked like. And one of the things that I realized the most was, at that time, it was only 4 months in, the level of iman that the people had was still sky high. And you know, we hear all these stories and we hear all these, you know, inspiring stories, and until you're there and see it with your own eyes, you'll always have that little bit of, you believe it, but you don't really feel it. But when I was there, the things that I saw, which I'll talk about when I go through the slideshow, you'll see the level of iman of these people. And I used to, it wasn't just my observation, but an observation of a lot of different people. They said that if there was ever going to be a generation during our lifetime that we would see who would have a level of iman that you could say is a fraction of the close to the Sahabas, it would be these people. You know, us here, myself definitely, you know, we don't even match in the level of their, and you know, the dust under their feet. But these people, every single person there also, every single person, well, every single person is a bit of an exaggeration, but let's say 90% of the people there either were full huffaz, or they at least knew 95% of the Quran. And it was a badge of honor that they would wear. And in fact, they would come over to me sometimes and they would say, yeah, do you know, they would start reciting an ayah and then expect me to finish it. I'm not a hafiz, so I would just look at them blankly, and then they would look at me with a bit of disdain. How can you not know this? You know, you're Muslim, how can you not know? And in the mornings when we used to go to the A&E department, we'd have to walk through some of the areas where the camps had been set up. And even though there was no sanitation, there was just, you know, sewage flowing in between the tents, etc., and there was no privacy or anything. All you could hear is the kids, as young as this child that I can see in front of me, sitting there just reciting Quran, and it was the mothers mostly who would sit there, and they would have a class of about 10-15 kids where they would just be listening to every single one of them Quran, and that's how they would spend their whole day. You know, our kids, if they don't have the TV or if they don't have the PlayStation or whatever it is, they get bored in 2 seconds. They had nothing there, but they would sit all day and read Quran. It was something which is ingrained in them, and then it made me reflect and think that this is one of the things that obviously leads to the level of iman that they had. So what we would get at that time was there was just mass bombings, mass casualty events coming in, and the overriding feeling at that time was of disbelief. I was shocked, I felt numb. I was thinking, how can this be allowed to carry on? Remember, this was about 4 months in now to the whole genocide. How can the world watch this and allow it to carry on? So anyway, when I left, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when I came back, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed me with another opportunity very quickly, a quick turnaround in order to go back to Gaza again for another mission. This time I went to the central area, and the central area at that time now was the area that was under siege. This time I went in Ramadan, and I went in the last 10 nights of Ramadan, and I stayed there for the first 5 days of Shawwal, and I also spent Eid there. And this time, it was only a difference of about 4 weeks between my two missions. This time I had already noticed a change in the people. All of a sudden, the prices of the food and the prices of all the commodities had gone through the roof. For instance, a piece of toilet paper, one sheet of toilet paper, so not the whole roll, just literally one square that you pull off that's not even enough to do anything with, it would cost $8. And a bar of soap, not even the size of my phone, maybe half the size of my phone, chopped up into small little bricks, small little pebbles, that was $5 a piece. So you could see now that people were starting to feel the financial strain, because before, what was happening at the border in Egypt, people were allowed to bring in whatever money they wanted. You know, I had a Jordanian brother, may Allah reward him. He was next to me on one of the trips, and he was carrying a duffel bag. And I just, I said to him, "You're holding onto that very tight because he wouldn't let go. He'll drop all his other bags." He said, "There's $750,000 in this one bag." So the thing is, that was the level of money that people were able to bring in, and they were taking. So there was, but then by the time I got there the second time, they had really put a clamp down on this. So people were starting to feel the strain. People were starting to, and naturally, when people start feeling the strain, what happens? You start seeing crime come up to the surface. So before, when you'd hear a bomb land and you'd see it land and the building would start collapsing, you'd see people rushing to go and pull the people out of the rubble. This time when I went, you'd see people rushing, some to help, but the majority would go and loot the place that has just been bombed. Then they would take it to sell, because these are the desperate measures that they have to take. This is the kind of situation that they've been put in. And remember, this is not their fault. This is because of the blockade, because of the genocide, because all borders are closed. And the other thing that I saw was, because people's frustrations were starting to boil over. Okay, there was a lot of, before, when 95% of the injuries that I was seeing were inflicted by the occupiers, what was happening this time, a good 10 to 15 to maybe 20% was inflicted between the Palestinians themselves, where they started fighting. Everyone would carry a weapon, everyone would carry either a knife or they would have a gun, and they would start fighting over the commodities. And this is probably part of the plan, the long thought out plan that the occupiers wanted to do in the first place, to completely break down and degrade the society. So I really started seeing some degradation of the society. And then the third mission that I did was in September 2024. And again, I went to the central area. This time, alhamdulillah, I stayed a little bit longer than I stayed before. And it was again in the same hospital. But this time, what I saw, I started seeing that rather than just bombings, okay, what was happening now was the people who had not had their medicines for so long. Let's say you have a patient who has heart failure or who has got cancer, and they've not been able to have their medication because of the blockade. They were coming in really ill at the end stage of their life, and they were just dying. There were people who needed dialysis, for instance, because of lack of resources, because the dialysis machines had been destroyed by bombings of the hospitals, which I'll show some of those pictures in a minute. Those people couldn't even have dialysis, and they were dying literally by drowning on their own fluids, drowning in the fluid in their lungs, and they were just dying. So there was a lot of side effects. Psychiatric patients who hadn't had their psychiatric medication were jumping off the 6th and 8th floor of buildings because they couldn't handle the voices anymore that were in their head. Because why? They didn't have the medication. The medication blockade was there. The other thing that we saw was that they had crammed, at this time, they had crammed the whole population of Gaza into the central area. The level, the smell that I experienced and smelt there, I have never, ever, ever smelt in my whole life. And I don't think you would find that smell anywhere else. Bodies piled on top of each other. There were some cats nearby, and somebody was trying to feed the cats, one of the people who had come on the mission with me, and he got told off by the local Palestinians. They said, "Why are you bringing food here to bring for the cats? First of all, we've got no food. We need the food. And secondly, these cats, if you keep bringing them here, you see those few bodies that are still there on the floor that are just covered up with like a little blanket. The cats are feeding on those bodies. So we're trying to drive them away, and you're bringing them back." So even the animals, were desperate. You can understand the situation and how it was. And when I was there on the third mission, I thought, you know what? I need to go back this time, and I need to take a message back, and I need to tell people, what do we need? What do they want from us? What do the Palestinians want from us? So I spent a lot of time this time, when I went in September, speaking to them, gathering information as to what they want from us. And they told me that they sat down, when we did have a few minutes where we could sit down and talk, And they mentioned a few things that they wanted. First and foremost, and this might come as a little bit of a sort of shock or coming from a left field sort of angle. What they want, they said that one day we were with a patient and the patient didn't survive. The patient died, had a gunshot wound to the head from a sniper. Brain was coming out. We tried whatever we could, but these are what they normally call hopeless case. So he said to me, he says, what do you feel? I said, subhanallah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward him with Jannah, and may Allah destroy the occupiers, destroy those who are trying to take their land. He says, it's your fault this guy is dead. I looked at him and I said, what do you mean it's my fault? Why is it my fault? I didn't say that. I was just looking at him confused. He could tell I was confused. He says, don't you realize it's because of you that this is happening? And I was saying to him that, but what do you mean? And he said, Islamophobia. He says, you let Islamophobia develop in your country, and because it developed, when they found out that Muslims were being bombed, and Muslim children were dying, and Muslim women were dying, and innocent Muslim men were dying, then nobody cared because it was Islamophobia. They said, oh, it's Muslims, okay, don't worry about it, it's fine. Whereas if it had been non-Muslims, the whole world would have put an end to this. They would have put embargoes on Israel, they would have put sanctions on them, they would have done left everything that you can think of. But they said, you dropped the ball on this. When you should have opened your masajids, the doors were closed. When you should have been out giving dawah and counteracting the narrative, you missed the opportunity. So this was one, and this really hit home. And then he looked at me and he says, do you think you've come here for us? Obviously by this time, they've seen me for the third time, so they're a bit more familiar with me now, so they can talk to me a bit more openly. And he says, what, do you think you've come here to help us? And I said, this is why I didn't want to name this event Missions of Mercy, but I couldn't think of any other name. But they said, you've come here for yourself. Don't think you've come here for us. We can do without you. We don't need you. Okay, we appreciate that you've come, but really you haven't really done any, you made a major difference. You've come to satisfy your own heart. And I thought about it and I thought, you know what, he's right actually. And he says, I'll tell you why, because one day we had a little girl, 4-year-old girl, she came in, and I'll show you her picture. And the bomb had fell on her house, she was crushed under the rubble. Okay, and then it set on fire, so she had burns as well. Her parents brought her in, or relatives, whoever they were, they brought her in, and it looked like she was breathing her last breaths. We quickly evaluated her, myself and this other doctor, and we decided we need to put a tube inside her mouth to protect her airway, and we need to put what we call a chest drain in the side of in the lungs in order to drain the blood that we identified. Bear in mind, we had no x-rays, we had no CT scans, we had nothing. So it was just based on purely on what we hear. So whilst I was putting the tube into the mouth and he was putting the chest drain in, he was a medical student. He says, do you feel now what we're going through? Look at this child. You've told me you've got your own children. I said, yes, I feel it. He gave me a slap in the middle of this resuscitation. He gave me a slap. And I was a bit shocked, but I carried on. He says, first of all, just before I explain why I slap you, I want you to tell me what's going through your mind. So I said, I'm looking at the monitor and I'm looking at the oxygen levels. I'm thinking, why are her oxygen levels going down? Okay, she's going to lose blood. We're going to have to get some blood. We're going to have to give her this. We're going to have to give her that. Oh, okay, where else? I need to maybe scan the abdomen to have a look to see whether or not there's any bleeding going on there. Okay, which surgeon do I need to call? He says, just stop. He says, that's your thought process, isn't it? I said, yeah. He says, so, and I said, I'm feeling now what you're feeling. And he said, while you're thinking that, and I'm putting the chest drain in on the other side, my hands are shaking because I'm thinking, is my child coming next? My hands are shaking because I'm thinking, maybe this person was from my area and my tent has been bombed. And I'm also thinking, oh, if my tent hasn't been bombed, I haven't got any food for today. I have to go, okay, I'm going to have to stand in the queue for just some filtered water, a small bottle of filtered water for about 3 hours today. Okay, my tent, it was ripped. I need to fix that, otherwise I'm not going to have anywhere to sleep tonight. I can't leave my wife alone and come here. These are the thoughts that are going through my mind. So he says, don't ever think that you feel what we're feeling. And he says, that's the second thing that I want you to understand. The second thing is that don't make us to be superheroes who you make us in such a way, you put us onto such a status that people will think, oh, they're okay, they're fine, they've got Iman, they're going to get Jannah anyway, and then naturally you will feel more relaxed and you'll... No, tell people that we have real world worries. Our Iman goes up and down, up and down. So he said, what else can you do? The other thing that you can do is talk about us to everyone. Talk about us. Don't be afraid to talk about us, because only when we see your sacrifice. And they loved the fact, remember when the university encampments happened, when the university and the people were camping in the universities, they said, when we saw that, we loved it, because people were sacrificing, willing to sacrifice their degree for us. They were willing to sacrifice their whole future career for us. So do something, put yourself in the line of fire. Don't just sit there. Then we will value your sacrifice. And they pointed at me and said, we will value this more than what you are doing here. You have come here, fine, nice. But we will value when you go back. And this is why I decided to start going around and giving talks and fundraising and speaking to media, etc. is because they said, we will value when you put your neck on the line. That's what we want to see. We want to see this sacrifice. And then the last thing they said was, please, for God's sake, for the sake of Allah, teach your children Islam and teach them history. Because if they know Islam and they know history, then their next generation will recognize this happening way before it actually happens. They'll notice the steps, they'll notice history repeating itself, and they'll be able to stop it before it becomes a reality. Does everyone understand that? Yeah? Very, very important message. This is from their mouths directly to me, and I'm relating it directly to you. So tackle the Islamophobia, really up the efforts, and then the fifth thing he said was, your children, diversify their skill set. Don't just make everyone doctors. Don't just make everyone, lawyers, and diversify the skill set. We need AI. We need people who are good in materials. We need people who are good in construction. We need people who can, in everything, not just for rebuilding Gaza, but you need the way that a community thrives is by having a varied skill set where everyone can come together towards a common goal. Have people, teach your children to be able to speak, to orate an argument, to be able to teach them to be able to debate, put them in these kind of things. So this is what they want. They want from us, basically. So what I'm going to do now, before I take any questions, is I'll quickly show you a slideshow. Is this working? Sorry, I have to switch on.